Hey kids, it's John. It's time for it's time for our weekly big idea devotion. This week we're learning about how Paul preaches in a place called Lystra. Can you guys say that? Lystra. Lystra. It's a really interesting story. A question I want to ask you guys before we get started is, what's something great you have heard about? Something great you have heard about in your life? Because today in this lesson, we're going to learn about some great things that Paul talked about. So our first picture, so these are a little challenging, okay? So this first picture, we're going to come back to for drawing number 6. So for this picture right here, it looks like they're walking on top of that building, but that's not what they're doing, okay? So you're just going to draw some rectangles, okay, where they overlap each other, and some stick figures here in the middle. And as always, you can pause the video because this one will take you a minute. It took me a minute to draw because you guys know my drawing skills they're up there, okay? So here's what's going on in this message in Acts 14 with the first picture. The good news of Jesus was spreading all over. Paul and his friend Barnabas were telling God's good news from city to city, but some of the religious leaders were furious at Paul and Barnabas. They wanted them to stop what they were doing. They even tried to kill Paul and Barnabas. So they were not happy about what they were doing here. So here's the second picture. You're going to draw the temples from 2 Z's, okay? So you're just doing a regular Z and then a backwards one. And then you're just doing lines to fill in the rest in a big triangle up here, okay? So this is a picture of the temple. And here's what's going on there. Paul and Barnabas, they didn't stop telling about Jesus. They knew God is greater than anyone. They trusted God's power to protect them. One day they traveled to the town of Lystra, which is where our story is today, where there was a big temple to a god named Zeus. The people of Lystra believed Zeus was the most powerful god, and they worshiped him at a temple. So that's what's going on here. And our third picture here, you're just drawing this stick figure guy using V's and W's, those kind of shapes, okay? So here's what's going on in this picture. I'm going to stay out of the screen a little bit here so you can focus on if you need to pause that picture. So Paul and Barnabas, they began to tell the good news about Jesus. A large crowd gathered to hear them. In the crowd, Paul saw one man who was crippled. That means he had never been able to walk, okay? So in our next picture, you're drawing, looks like floating heads or something, 2 people who are shocked, and this same guy who is standing and rejoicing, okay? So he was not able to walk, but now he is. So what happened? Well, I'll tell you. Paul called out to the lame man, "Stand up on your feet." The lame man did. He jumped up and started walking around. God's power healed the man, and the crowd went wild with excitement. Can you imagine someone not able to walk and then they could? That's what happened in this story. So our fifth picture, you're writing the name Zeus and Hermes, okay, or Hermes, and Zeus and Hermes, and then you're just drawing a big circle with a slash, basically meaning, no, don't worship them. We worship the one true God. So here's what's going on here. The people didn't understand what had happened. They thought Paul and Barnabas were really their false gods, Zeus and Hermes. An old story told that Zeus and Hermes had once come to Lystra dressed as men, but no one had welcomed them except an old man and his wife. So the town had been punished. So that was what they thought was happening. And so now we're going to go back to our picture number 6. And you're going to basically have the same picture. That's why I left some space here. But this time, you're going to draw little shapes like this. And this represents people that were listening to the story. You can draw as many as you want. So that represents the people that were listening to the story. So remembering the story, the people didn't want to make that same mistake again. So they rushed off to the temple of Zeus to get the priest. Paul and Barnabas soon realized that the people planned to worship them. And that's not what they wanted, okay? Our 7th picture is really simple. You're writing the name God And underneath the O, you're going to write only. So God only. Here's what's going on here. Stop, yelled Paul and Barnabas. We are just men, people like you. We came to tell you about the only living God, the creator of all things. Paul told how everything good comes from God, not from idols or men. And then our last picture is down here. You're going to draw two faces that are angry and sad, and then someone who's really excited and they're running around. Okay. And here's what's going on in this picture. Just then, the same men who had been trying to kill Paul in other cities came into Lystra. Paul and Barnabas are troublemakers, they said. Soon everyone in the city was so angry that they began to throw rocks at Paul. So Paul fell down and they dragged him out of town and they left him. They thought he was dead. They threw rocks at him so many times that they hurt him and they thought he was dead. But Paul's friends found him and helped him back into town. And the very next day, Paul and Barnabas were traveling again. So let me ask you some questions. Who did the people of Lystra think Paul and Barnabas were? They thought they were these guys, didn't they? Okay. But what did Paul tell them? You see, we know about the great things God has done. We see the beautiful world God has made, and we can read about God's greatness in the Bible. God wants us to tell others about the great things he has done to help people learn about him. So Paul and Barnabas, they loved God so much that they wanted everyone to know about him, even if it meant that people wouldn't like them. So I want to challenge you, kids, even if people don't believe in God, love them anyway. If people think differently than you do, love them anyway. And the way we treat them is one of the main ways we tell them about God. By loving them, we tell them about the love of God. So thank you so much for being here this week. And I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you next time.